Okay, so now we'll move on to the next activity, which is rendering, right? And what rendering is, if you're not aware, is getting hyperrealistic photos from your 3D models. Now, I want to show you an example of the rendering, so don't follow along for now, but if I go to here, you can see this, and what I'll do is just a quick in-canvas render. And I want you to take a look at this image here, right? You can see how it's rendering, but look at this. Does this image or this representation of our stopper look photorealistic to you? I don't think it does, right? So what if instead I showed you this image here? You can see the difference, right? This is the same model, of course, with the joints. So does this look photorealistic? I mean, to me, it looks pretty good. There are some things that can be improved, which I'll go on about later. And if you really push it, you can see you can actually get some pretty decent images that you can use for either your projects or, you know, even just marketing. Again, display is what helps sell your stuff, right? So in this case, you want a nice looking picture for your nice looking product. So in this case, I'll undo this. Stop. So if you follow along from the first activity, you don't have to do anything at this point, assuming you have all these joints assembled correctly. At the time of this recording, there's an issue with the sliding joint, which I would have fixed, but you're meant to be able to rotate this up. I'll show you like so. It should look a little bit like this. If you're not at this stage, then I recommend you go back and do this, or not. It's not really very important, unless you want to get this position exactly. You can also just leave it as this. And what we'll do now is we'll go into our render workspace. And you saw me do that just now. Under your workspace here, you go to render, and now open up a whole new tool. And if you're not familiar, don't worry, it's actually very, very simple, as you can see from here, but it can also be very complex. So what we'll start off first is we want to understand how we get from this image or this quality kind of render to that high quality photo that I showed. And with that, there are three things you need to take note of. First is materials, second is lighting, and third is environment. With rendering, these are like your holy trinity, right? If even one of these are not good, then it's going to significantly affect the quality of your final render. So let's start with the easiest one, materials. And that can be done in appearance, which you've seen before, right? In this case, appearance can be found here as an icon. So you can see from here that our appearance is already put in by the default in the manufacturing company's webpage. So what I'm going to do is I could always delete all these, but I can't be bothered. I recommend you do, just to keep things organized. But what I'll do instead is, I know this is probably going to be steel cast, so I'm going to type in steel. And you should find steel cast here as a material selection. I'm just going to click and drag. And you can see it here as well in your design now. So I'll just click from there, makes it a lot easier. And I'll select all the metal components, including the pins. You can see here there's a white bit there. I'm going to select that. I'll just remove the appearance because I don't want it. And again, I'll just do this for all the parts that are not red currently. Okay, so that looks okay to me. Now I've got my material for the metal, but let's just say I'm actually trying to 3D print these red parts here, right? And I think if you're an AM student, you find this very useful. If you type in nylon, you go down, you can see here nylon 12 with Formlabs Fuse 1 3D printer, right? And so this will give you a appearance of an SLS printed part. And so I'll click and drag these onto my red handle and my plunger. And now that's pretty much it for our materials. We only have two. Again, if you had more parts like rubber, silicone, whatever, you can find it in your materials library. But with our materials done, what we're going to do is we're going to move on next to the scene settings. And it will be here under setup, scene settings. It should also be in here, scene settings. You can always click the icon, it's a lot easier. And there's two parts to scene settings. There's these settings and then the environment library. We'll get to that in a second. First, let's look at the settings, right? So let's go sequentially how you would do this in real life. If we go to color, you can see that we can select it and edit our color into whatever we like. Generally, I just keep it at this because if I'm doing very quick renders, this helps to give a little bit of contrast, but you may want to select this to white. Just click and drag anywhere, it's like a color wheel. I don't need to show you this. And what we want to do now is go into our environment library, because this is the most important part in my opinion. Currently, you can see we have current environment. I'm going to go back to, this is what you should see, okay? And what this is essentially a simulated environment in the Fusion workspace itself. So right now it has lights, which is sharp highlights. I don't know what yours would be by default, but if you were to click, let's just say I want cool light, I'm going to click this and drag it into my canvas. Give it a second, and you can see how the lighting has changed, right? Again, I can do something like warm light. And if you look at the shadow, if you give it a second. Oh, sorry, I'll do skylight instead. I think it's more pronounced. Yeah, you can see how that shadow becomes very different. Now it's a skylight, it's coming from the top. You can even see the faint reflection of the light bulb fixture here. So again, the environment, I think I'll explain it better in the next part here, but just think of it as like an environment for your rendering scene, right? So I'm going to close this for now, and the reason is because what I want to talk about are HDRIs. What do those stand for? It means high dynamic range images. And for this, you need to go to the, your internet browser and just go to Google and type in Polyhaven. Right? It should be the first result. And you can see here, this is basically just sort of like it's like Thingiverse, but for HDRIs, textures, models, things like that. It's usually for games development or rendering. I'm going to select HDRIs here. And hopefully the internet is fast enough. But when you come here, you can see that it's sort of, it's sort of got like a little grid view, and what it actually shows you is your HDRIs. Now there's a few things I want to point out here, which is first off, the default HDRIs in Fusion, these, if I go back to scene settings, these like skylight, cool light, grid light, these are HDRIs. But I find they lack a lot of color as well as good quality lighting. This is more for very simple renders, I feel. If you don't need anything fancy, this will work just fine. I'm gonna go back to my HDRI here, and you see 4 balls as and a background image. What's this mean? Well, if you think about it, these balls are basically materials, how they will look in this environment here in the background. And don't worry, I'll click on one of them and show you later. But for now, the first ball on the left, so from left to right, the first ball is glass, the second is ceramics, the third is metals, and the fourth is plastics. So you can see, if you look even here in the preview, you can see how the reflections kind of look a little bit different. So this is the kind of background image that if you did have a metal, it would look like this when you rendered it, essentially. Of course, owing to the different geometry and whatnot. But in this case, our part here is a plunger or whatever. It looks like it belongs in a workshop. So what I'm just going to do is in the search bar here, I'm just going to type in machine shop, right? And you can see here now it's got a few different backgrounds, like so. I'm just going to select this one, machine shop 2. If I click on it, and you can see this looks very weird, right, this picture. Well, it's because this is a 360-degree photo. It's like a panoramic photo of the entire environment. And so if you were to wrap this into a sphere, it would essentially give you the environment of your world. Anyways, for now, what you can do is you can download it here. Should you go 16 or 8K? I find 4K is enough. Doesn't really make a big difference, 8K or 16K. Just stick with 4K. Select HDR, not EXR, and then download. In this case, I've already downloaded it. So once you download it, it'll give you a zip file, unzip it, you put in your file directory, it should be fine. So now I've got this downloaded, I want to put it into my rendering workspace. How do I do that? Well, if I scroll down, you can see here at the very bottom, attach custom environment. If we click on the little file icon, now you can select it. And in this case, if I wanted to, I'll select the machine shop here, the HDR. I've already done this, you can do it, click that. And it should automatically go to it. If not, you can always go to library here. So if you go to top, library. Instead of Fusion 360, just select attach to design or whatever. Does it not? Oh, right, yeah, because I haven't actually done it. Oh, in that case, then let's just do it, sorry. So I'm going to put it in here. Just give you a second. Okay, so now you can see here my machine shop HDRI is loaded into my library. If I now click and drag it, watch what happens. Now you can see that this has sort of a different shape, right? And you can see my lighting has changed. And by the way, shape, I mean that the lighting fixture looks different. But essentially, it's a bit blurred, but this reflection is of this picture right here. And if you have very reflective parts, that would be a lot more prominent. And my shadow is here, right? And now what I want to do is show you a very good tip for rendering. What I like to do is, let's just say I'll close this. And one good thing is that you can actually move parts here, so you can always position them if you have them, if you have good joints. And let's just say I want to leave something like this. I want to render this. Actually, let's go a bit closer. Let's be a bit artistic. I want to do something like that. In fact, maybe I'll move this here on the side. Somewhere there. Okay, actually I'll make this a bit higher. Actually, nah, you know what? Let's leave it there. It's fine. Okay. So try and get something like this. Again, just use your view pen. And what we can do is we can go to named views. If we drop down, you can see there's a few different types. This is just your view box. So if you hit top, it'll go to top, front, right, all the same here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, new named view. Now, if I'll just rename this render. You can name it whatever you want. I'll just name it render. And now let's just say I go and I fiddle around with stuff and I go, I forgot I had that perfect shot. Where'd it go? Now, do I go back and try and find it again? No. Just click this and it brings me right back to the camera view. So it's very useful if you need certain angles. You can always say I like this look, I'll save it like this. Then you can go and edit it and always return to the exact camera view that you have using this space. In this case, I will leave it like so. And I'll show you the next parts, which is going back to scene setup, or scene setting, sorry. And here, now with our environment, I can show this a little bit more clearly. First off is the brightness. You can increase the brightness like so. This will affect more so, how do you say, your reflections and surface roughness. I mean, think of it like increasing the intensity of the light bulb that is pointing at this image. Usually I find 1000 plus is enough. Again, we can leave these as is. If you want, you can put reflections. This is if you have a reflective surface. In this case, we're not going to use one, so we'll leave it unchecked. I highly recommend you leave camera as in perspective. This is just how real life photos look like. And you can also adjust the focal length. I would just leave it as is, unless you're a photographer and you know how to use all these settings. I'll leave it as is. And one thing I find that adds a lot of realism to your photos, if you're going for that, is to add depth of field, right? And again, it's saying would only be visible if ray tracing enabled. That's fine. If you don't have Google GPU, then I'm sorry, but don't enable the option. But now you can select a center of focus, and if you think about it, with depth of field, the center or the closest object to you is what's in focus, and the stuff in the background is what's blurred, right? I mean, if you want to, as an example, look at something that's close to you, like hold a hand in front of your face, look at the finger, and you see the periphery start to blur. It's kind of like that. So in this case, let's just say this angle here is the closest point. So we'll just click right there, and we can increase the blur. I'll show this in the canvas itself. So if I click in canvas render, and I'll move this up, you can see how everything is starting to blur in the back, right? Because I've got the blur a lot higher. So this looks like it's right in my face. See how this is crisp, this is more blur. If I go back, slide it all the way down, let's just say to here. So I've got very little blur. You can see it looks exactly the same. It's all clear and crisp. And if I make it really blur, you see nothing is showing up except this part here. So play around with it. I find, I think, what was it, 0.2 is fine for me personally. Somewhere around here is fine. I think this is okay. Again, it depends on the angle that you play with. If you go very close into the tip here, then you want to increase it more. But I find this is fine. I'm going to stop the in-canvas render. Oops. Let's revert our exposure back to normal. And here, last thing is the aspect ratio. What we can do is we can select how we want our image to look. In the sense, if I select 1:1 square for those Instagrammers, this is how it look. If we go 4:3, all these aspect ratios, I like to stick to 16:9 since that's most widescreen laptops. You can always also just leave it as the viewport aspect ratio. This will just change how your final render is saved, the image. So with that, I'm just going to hit close. And that's basically all you really need for a basic understanding of rendering. Right now, what I want to do is just show you a little bit of the differences in terms of like the material. So let's go back to appearance. And you can see here, let's just say this, let's just say Formlabs actually wakes up their idea and they decide to include nicer colors, right? So we'll go to edit, we'll select our material, in this case 9 and 12, we'll click edit. And if we select, let's just say we want a really hot pink, right? Formlabs make this a thing. We want a hot pink PA12. We can adjust the color. And the thing is, the nice thing is we can also adjust the roughness, right? So let's just say your SLR parts are very rough. Then this is going to make this have a more rough surface finish. With if say this was stainless steel polished, your roughness would essentially affect the reflectivity in the render, right? And in fact, I wonder if I should just show this perhaps as an example. What I'll do is I'll go to polished. I don't really care about the material. Let's just do aluminium. We'll make this part polished, as you can see. So right click, oops, not duplicate. Hang on. That's aluminium. Okay, we'll right click, edit. And you can see the roughness is at 0. So it's actually very low already. If I increase it, you can see it's basically just going to be super rough. But if I go to 0, this is basically a mirror shine. Right? We hit done, go to close. And now if we render, it might take a while. But you can see this is a lot more polished, it's a lot shinier basically. It's almost like a mirror, whereas all the rest looks realistic. I find I don't like polished looks that much unless it's strategically placed. For now, I'll just leave it. It's not too big of a deal. Again, I'll stop. And one thing I want to say is, for your scene settings, you can see how my shadow looks really horrible. But the good thing is you can actually position that. So under scene settings position, you can actually tell Fusion where you want your environment to be. And you can see, if you see the reflection right there, see how that image changes? That's what I'm doing essentially is rotating that environmental sphere so that the lighting is pointing in a different direction. And this way I can adjust how I want the lighting to be. In this case, let's see. I quite like something like, depends where you want really. This is more of an art than a genuine. Let's just say, I quite like this one a bit better. Let's just do this, right? The light's coming from the left side. It's going to give you some nice contrast on the edges. And from here, we'll just hit OK. Sorry, just move this up. Close. And so now you can see our environment's changed. Now if I render, this should show the reflection. What I want to do though is before I render this, I want to give a little, one more tip that I find is useful. If we go back to our design workspace, what we're going to do is add a table, right? And we can do this two ways. We can make a surface, we can make it solid. I'm just going to make a surface. I'm going to capture the position because I want to move it back. So this is a situation where you would want to capture the position. Oops, not 3 point. So I'll select the rectangle. I'll just do a center rectangle. And I'm going to make this really big because if you think about the angle that I'm looking at, it's going to see quite fine to the background. I'm going to finish sketch. I'll patch this end to make a surface. Hit OK. So now I've got this massive surface and a tiny part. Don't worry. I'm going to go to appearance. I'll use the shortcut A. And personally, I like this one a lot. It's called measured, surface measured 10 cm black. Don't worry if it looks like this. Just hit this icon here to download it and it'll instantly download. Click and drag onto your surface. And now if we go back into the render workspace and we hit our camera, you can see now we've got a nice background. It looks more engineering. Again, play with it. There's a few different types. You can have wood mahogany, you can have metal, plastic, up to you. And so now what I'll do is first I'll show you how to render. So we're happy with this. We want to render this. We can go to render here. And this is what we call the cloud rendering, right? There's two types. There's local and there's cloud. Cloud just means that Fusion renders it for you. Think of it as you're getting them to render the picture using their computer, their GPU processing power. If you have a terrible GPU, then you can always spend credits and pay for the render essentially. So make sure your render is exactly what you want it to be. In this case, I want to actually make a few more edits before I do this. And the reason for that is you see this looks all good and real, but what immediately strikes you as this isn't real? You might not be able to quite put it to words. You might look at this picture and think, yeah, I know something's not quite right. This is obviously a 3D render, but what is it that, like, you can't quite put it to words? Well, I'll be willing to bet it's this plunger thing here. If you look at it, let's really look at it. Look at all this. This looks fine. The texture looks great. The shadows match up. Looks like real life. The screws look like nylon 12 or whatever. But this looks like a cartoon. This looks like someone photoshopped it in. And why is that? Well, if we go back to our Fusion, you can see, and we'll go to design here just to make things easier. If you look at it, these are all sharp edges. And so what you want to do realistically with rendering is to avoid sharp edges. So I'll give this a fillet, like so. And you can do this for all the parts. Even all these sharp edges like this, these don't add depth. Basically, that sharp highlight is the same with this. These angles here, you can see here. I'm going to add one as well. I'll just give this a 1mm fillet. This part here, the model is actually wrong, so I'll just fix that. I think it was 3.5. Okay. I'll just fillet this edge as well. And all these edges, what I've done is I've gone in and basically filleted all of these here as much as I can. Alright, one. Select all of these. I'm not going to do all of them, obviously, but just to show you the difference it can make. So all these are filleted. And if I go back to my render workspace, you can see it looks more like a real metal. This also looks a bit more like a plunger. It might work differently for the nylon 12 material. It should be fine though. What I'll do is now I'll go back to my render. I'll go to the render cloud setting. I am going to select the type. So in this case, I don't want a video. I want to have, I think it was it web or mobile? Was it print? It was one of these things. Basically, you want something that fits your pixel dimensions. Well, obviously not a video. You can also do custom. In this case, I think I'm into custom. So yeah, here we go. So what I do is generally I use 1920 by 1080. That's standard HD. But you can also just increase this if you want. It should be fine. Aspect ratio, I've got it to 16:9. Should be fine. And what I'll do is I'll select Cloud Render, because with the educational license, so enjoy it while it lasts, it's actually free. So you can see here right now there's 2 credits required. I could also do standard quality that reduces the price by half, sorry. But final just looks a lot better. And since it's free, why the hell not? So I'm going to click render. And it's going to take this image now and render it. And again, it's going to do this in the background in Fusion's cloud servers or whatever, so I can still work on my design and not worry about my computer bursting into flames. So I'll at the same time also do an in-canvas render, right? And this would be a local render in a sense. Alternatively, if say I have a very good GPU and I want to work on some parts, I can also just do render and select local render instead of cloud render, right? Local render over here. Same thing. What I will do though is I just want to show you, right? You can see here, this is sort of like a timeline for your render. What it's doing is it's essentially going, telling you how long it's been since you first started the render. And this here is the iteration number. This means how many iterations or essentially cycles it's done to render your image and make it look as high quality as possible. Generally, the more iterations, the higher quality. So you can see here now it's still very blurry. It's kind of got that background noise. That's because it's not had enough time to fully render. Fusion's quite good because it gives you a little excellent, final, and infinite. Excellent just means it's good enough, which is good enough for engineering. Final means it's probably the best it's going to get, right? Anything past this is just diminished returns. And infinite is, as it says, infinite. You could leave this for 10 years, and as long as Fusion's still in business, it'll run, right? So this essentially is how you can control. You can always select the arrow here and say, I don't want a final, I'll put excellent. I could go and have a coffee, I could work on other stuff, and this will automatically stop at excellent. Generally though, I like to leave it at final because I have more computing power. And essentially this will just stop, and I can always save. So for now, I'm not going to leave it all the way to final. I think I'll leave it for excellent here if it gives it enough time. What I'll talk about in the little bit of time I have left is, let's look at this here. So if you look at this image, you can see it's not quite as nice. This is a local render, and you try and guess how long this took my computer with a 3080, although it's a laptop, to generate. This took an hour, and it had over, I think, something like 6,000 iterations, give or take. Maybe not so much, I think it was about 4,000. But it had a lot of iterations, and it took a full hour. So that's basically a full hour of my computer that I can't use for gaming or modeling. So it's not fun. And if you look at this one, this is a Fusion Cloud render. And you can see just immediately the quality just looks a lot nicer, especially the depth of field. So I would say if you're going for quality, Fusion does tend to be better, although for some reason it didn't seem to render my background. I'm not very sure why. But honestly, this looks just as fine to me. If I had to choose, I would say this is Fusion's cloud service is a lot faster. It lets you do other work at the same time. And generally, it seems to produce nicer parts. Although this, again, is very much on your own artistic skill. So if there's anything I want you to sort of take away from this, is that rendering is actually more of an art than engineering. If you're a photographer, then you sort of understand the principles of what you should do to set up your scene, how to position your parts. This is really just practice, practice, and practice as always, right? So don't be, try different things. Try just even small little models you make, right? If you make an RC car, try and make something that looks really nice with that depth of field, with an awesome background. And then with this, you can always take this into Photoshop or whatever graphics software you want. And you can add some, nice titles and whatever. This is also very useful for making renders for projects. I think for fundamentals of analysis, we had to do one in which we made at least I made a stereolithography diagram. I didn't do such a nice render because I didn't need to, but this would look very nice in a report as a figure. So with that, I'll also take the opportunity to go into our render because it's actually done. And so this took about, I want to say 5-10 minutes from when we left off. And you can see here, after our cloud render is done, it'll show up like so. We'll click it here. And I think it'll give you a little preview, like so here. And what we can do is we can download it with this icon here. We'll just download. You can also add some post-processing if you like. I generally prefer to do this in third-party software like Photoshop. I'll download the image as a PNG. And the good thing is you can also download it with a transparent background. And as you can see with the curved edges, again, this isn't the best because of the blur. But you see how this looks a lot more realistic now with the curves as compared to the sharp edges here. So a very useful tip is if you see any sharp edges, just fillet it. And it'll look a lot nicer. You can also see how the mirror polish has come out. It looks very nice. I'm not very sure if I don't think you can save these, like as in here in the rendering gallery. They seem to get lost whenever I try to access them again. So make sure that if you're going to use this image in the future again, just download it into your PC and save it somewhere. It's better than having to spend another 2 credits to re-render the whole thing.